Dinner was already set when we arrived. Long table, white plates. Everyone seated except my son, Evan, who stood beside me holding his fork like he wasn't sure he was allowed to use it yet. He was hungry. We'd rushed to make it on time because family dinners were important. My sister Karen glanced at him, then back at her plate. "He can eat after," she said casually. "Once the real family's done." No one laughed. No one corrected her either. Forks paused. Glasses hovered. Every adult at the table heard it and chose stillness instead of words. Evan looked up at me, confused, cheeks flushed, trying to figure out what he'd done wrong. I opened my mouth. My grandfather stopped me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at Karen. He set his fork down gently on his plate. The sound barely noticeable, but the room felt it. "Is that so?" he asked. Karen shrugged. "It's not a big deal. He can wait." My grandfather leaned back in his chair. He looked at Evan, then at the table, at the food, at the people pretending this was normal. He folded his napkin, slowly, carefully, like he was finishing something. Then he stood. Chairs creaked. No one spoke. My grandmother stared at her hands. My mother suddenly found something interesting in her glass. My grandfather didn't shout. He didn't scold. He did something instead. Something quiet. Something final. The kind of action that doesn't invite debate. "Before I tell you what he did, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now," because that moment ended dinner and changed how this family sat at a table forever. My grandfather didn't leave the room right away. He stood there for a moment, letting the silence do the work no lecture ever could. Karen shifted in her seat, suddenly aware that everyone was looking at her now instead of my son. "You're overreacting," she said, trying to smile. "It was just a joke." My grandfather finally looked at her, not angry, disappointed. "The kind that doesn't fade. A joke is when everyone laughs," he said, "not when a child wonders why he doesn't belong." Evan's grip tightened on his fork. I felt my chest tighten with it. My grandfather reached for Evan's chair and pulled it out, slowly, deliberately. He placed it at the table, right between him and me. "Sit," he told Evan. Evan hesitated, eyes flicking toward Karen. Then he sat. My grandfather took Evan's plate and filled it first. Meat, potatoes, everything Karen had served herself without thinking. He set it in front of Evan like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Eat," he said. No one touched their food. Karen opened her mouth again. "Dad?" My grandfather raised one finger. "Just one. This table is for family," he said, "and anyone who decides otherwise can finish their meal somewhere else." He picked up his fork again, but he didn't eat. He waited. One by one, people lowered their eyes. My mother pushed her plate toward Evan without a word. My grandmother nodded faintly. Karen sat frozen. Dinner didn't continue the way she'd planned. It continued the way it should have all along. No one spoke while Evan ate. Forks rested. Food cooled. The table that had always been loud suddenly felt watched. Not by my grandfather, but by conscience. Karen was the first to move. She pushed her chair back an inch, then stopped, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to leave yet. "You didn't have to make a scene," she said quietly. My grandfather didn't look at her. "I didn't," he replied. "You did." That landed harder than anything else. Evan ate carefully, like he was afraid the permission might be taken back. I hated that it had ever been in question. I hated that it took this moment for adults to remember what should have been automatic. My mother finally cleared her throat. "Let's just reset," she said. "We're family." My grandfather nodded once. "Then act like it." He finished his water, stood again, and pushed his chair in. "I'm done here," he said, not angrily, conclusively. My grandmother reached for him. "You're leaving?" "I am," he said. "Before I say something I can't take back." He looked at Evan. "You did nothing wrong," he said gently. "Never let anyone tell you to wait your turn for respect." Evan nodded. Karen scoffed under her breath. My grandfather heard it. He paused at the doorway and turned back. "One more thing," he said. This wasn't about dinner. Then he left. The door closed softly, but the sound stayed. No one touched their food after that, because when the oldest person at the table stands up for the smallest, pretending ends, and every excuse loses its seat. After the door closed, no one knew where to look. Plates sat untouched. The food smelled wrong now, like it didn't belong to us anymore. Evan finished a few bites, slower than before, eyes checking faces for permission that should have been permanent. My mother finally moved. She reached for her napkin, folded it, unfolded it. "We didn't mean it like that," she said, to no one in particular. Karen was joking. Karen nodded quickly. "Exactly. Everyone's too sensitive." I felt my hand curl into a fist under the table. I didn't speak. The room had already heard enough excuses for one night. My grandmother stood and began clearing dishes, not meeting anyone's eyes. The clink of plates sounded louder than conversation. It felt like cleanup after something broken, not after dinner. Evan asked softly, "Can I go wash my hands?" "Yes," I said, too fast. When he left, Karen leaned toward me. "You could have handled this better," she said. "You embarrassed people." I looked at her. "You embarrassed a child." She scoffed. "It's not that serious." That was the problem. It had always been serious, just never to the people who weren't asked to wait. My mother stood. "We'll talk about this later," she said, already retreating. No one invited my grandfather back. No one apologized to Evan. The meal ended in pieces, not courses. That night, driving home, Evan stared out the window and asked one question that told me everything had already changed. "Do we have to go back there again?" The next morning, my phone started buzzing before I'd finished my coffee. Messages stacked up fast. Family group chat, private texts, missed calls I didn't return. My mother wrote first. "Your grandfather overstepped." Then my aunt. "He embarrassed Karen in her own home." No one mentioned Evan's name. Karen sent a voice note. I didn't open it. I already knew the tone. Hurt pride dressed up as concern. She followed it with a text. "You could have corrected him quietly. We didn't need a performance." That word stuck with me. Performance. As if protecting a child was something you did for attention. When Evan came into the kitchen, he looked lighter than he had the night before. He poured cereal, sat down, and started eating without asking. That alone told me how much damage had been done before, and how powerful one moment of protection could be. "Is Grandpa mad?" he asked. "No," I said. He was clear. That seemed to satisfy him. Later that day, my grandfather called me. His voice was calm, steady. "I won't apologize," he said, "but I will explain if anyone asks." "They won't," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's why I did it." We sat in silence for a moment. "They were waiting for someone else to say something," he added. I was tired of waiting. That night, my mother sent one last message. "We need to talk about boundaries." I stared at it for a long time before realizing something important. Boundaries had finally been set. They just weren't set by the people who'd benefited from there being none. The week moved on, but the tension didn't. It just changed shape. Fewer messages, shorter calls, conversations that stayed polite but hollow, like everyone was afraid of touching the wrong edge again. Karen stopped talking to me completely. Instead, she talked around me. I heard about it through my mother. How Karen felt attacked. How she didn't feel safe being honest anymore. How my grandfather had crossed a line. No one mentioned the line Karen had crossed first. My mother tried to smooth things over the way she always did. She suggested another dinner. Smaller, quieter. "Just immediate family," she said, like that phrase hadn't already been used as a weapon. I asked one question. "Is Evan invited to eat with everyone?" She didn't answer right away. That told me everything. My grandfather didn't show up to the next gathering. Neither did we. No announcement. No explanation. We just didn't go. Evan noticed. "Are we in trouble?" he asked one night while brushing his teeth. "No," I said. "We're choosing better." He nodded like that made sense. Kids understand fairness faster than adults pretend to. A few days later, my grandfather sent Evan a small package. Inside was a simple note written in careful handwriting. "You never have to wait to belong." Evan taped it above his desk. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about one dinner. It was about who gets protected when things get uncomfortable. And for the first time, the answer wasn't the loudest person in the room. It was the quietest one who'd been told to wait. The shift didn't happen all at once. It showed up in small decisions people hoped wouldn't be noticed. Karen stopped hosting. My mother stopped inviting. Plans became vague, then disappeared. No one said why. They didn't need to. The table had changed, and everyone felt it. My grandfather stayed steady. He didn't argue his point again. He didn't remind anyone what he'd done. He just didn't bend. That silence carried more weight than any lecture. One afternoon, my mother called and asked if Evan wanted to come over and help her bake. She made sure to say help, not eat. I paused before answering. "Will everyone be eating together?" I asked. She sighed. Yes. That single word sounded like work. When we arrived, Karen wasn't there. No explanation, just absence. The kitchen felt careful, like every movement was being watched by memory. Evan washed his hands and sat at the counter. My mother handed him a spoon and smiled too brightly. "You can taste test," she said. My grandfather met my eyes across the room. Just once. A nod. Not approval. Alignment. We ate together that day. No jokes. No comments. No laughter that landed wrong. It wasn't warm, but it was correct. On the drive home, Evan asked, "Did Grandpa fix it?" "No," I said. "He showed them what right looks like." That mattered, because fixing implies things go back. This didn't go back. It moved forward with rules everyone now understood, even if they didn't like them. And once rules change in a family, pretending you don't see them becomes impossible. It didn't stay quiet because people were healed. It stayed quiet because people were careful. Karen didn't apologize. She didn't reach out. Instead, she told anyone who would listen that she was being pushed out and that my grandfather had chosen sides. The story shifted depending on who was listening, but the goal stayed the same. Make consequences sound like cruelty. My mother tried to balance both worlds. She called me more, asked about Evan, asked about school, about schedules. She avoided the subject the way people do when they're hoping time will fix what accountability should. One evening, she finally said it. "I just don't want this to tear the family apart," I answered honestly. "It didn't tear us apart. It showed us where the cracks were." She didn't reply. Evan started changing in small ways I didn't expect. He stopped asking permission before sitting down. He stopped watching faces before speaking. At a restaurant one night, he picked up his fork and started eating without looking at me first. That almost broke me, because I realized how long he'd been learning to wait. My grandfather noticed too. "Kids don't forget who makes space for them," he told me. "They remember it forever." Karen skipped the next holiday, then the one after that. No drama, no announcement, just distance. And strangely, things felt lighter, not happier, not perfect, but honest. Because once a family stops pretending cruelty is normal, everything else has to rearrange around that truth, even the people who refuse to. The real change showed up when no one was watching. Months passed without a single scene. No confrontations. No speeches. Just patterns adjusting themselves. Karen stayed away. My mother stopped trying to negotiate feelings. My grandfather kept doing the same thing he'd done since that night. Nothing extra, nothing less. That consistency mattered. One afternoon, my mother admitted it quietly. "Things are calmer now," she said, like she was surprised by it. Different, but calmer. I didn't answer right away, because calm hadn't come from compromise. It came from clarity. Evan noticed it too. He laughed louder, asked for seconds without checking. He stopped shrinking at tables, stopped measuring himself against adults' moods. One night he said, "I like eating together," like it was something new. That sentence stayed with me. My grandfather and I talked more often, not about the family, about small things. Weather, books, old stories that didn't need lessons attached. He never brought up the dinner again. He didn't have to. Karen sent one message eventually. Short, careful. Can we just move on? I stared at it for a long time. Moving on would have meant pretending nothing happened. Pretending Evan hadn't been told to wait. Pretending silence hadn't chosen a side for years. So I didn't reply. Not out of anger, out of respect for the line that had finally been drawn and held. Because once a child learns they don't have to wait to belong, you don't undo that lesson to make adults more comfortable. You protect it. Quietly, completely. The next holiday came and went without any announcements. No group messages. No awkward planning. We spent it quietly, me, Evan, and my grandfather. Simple food. One table. No waiting. Evan ate first. Not because anyone told him to. Because no one told him not to. My grandfather watched him for a moment, then smiled in that small way he had when something finally made sense. That's how it's supposed to work, he said. No lecture. No emphasis. Just fact. Later, Evan asked why Grandpa didn't come to the big family dinners anymore. My grandfather thought about it. Because some tables forget what they're for, he said, and I don't sit at those. Evan nodded like he understood more than his age suggested. My mother called that night. She didn't mention Karen. She didn't bring up the past. She asked how Evan was doing. I told her the truth. He's good, I said. He knows he belongs. There was a pause on the line. I should have said something that night, she admitted. Yes, I said. Not cruel, just honest. She didn't argue. When I hung up, I realized something had ended, and something else had started. Not a broken family, a smaller one, a quieter one. One where food wasn't a reward and silence wasn't a rule. My grandfather set his fork down that night too, not to stop dinner, to begin it. And from then on, no one at our table ever had to wait their turn to be treated like family again.